Hey y'all, welcome to Hyperreal Film Club presents Texas Film in Focus. I'm your host, Samantha Ray Lopez, and we are at episode 9. That means I've created 9 episodes as part of this 12-part podcast, and it has been a delight. If you follow me on Instagram, I recently posted a video as I was editing last week's episode, and I just had this moment of kind of gratitude overwhelm. I don't know what else to call it, but we'll call it that. And just in meeting all of these folks and having really meaningful conversations and learning about people and what kind of work they're doing in the filmmaking community and the industry at large, I've just become super inspired and kind of reminded of humanity and storytelling at its core and just how important it is to our culture and society in general. So that's been a really cool experience, and being able to revisit all of those interviews and pull out points that really resonated with me and fit under a specific topic, that's been quite the joy. And one of the great things about this project is being able to connect with all of these people and being able to connect with you as an audience. So just continuing these conversations. So thank you to everybody who has sent me feedback directly or is chatting with me on Instagram. That's definitely what's intended here. So my DMs are open for you. Unless you're trying to sell me a product or, want me to become some influencer for your brand. No, those are immediately blocked. And I'm sure those of you that are on Instagram frequently know what kind of solicitations I'm talking about. But yeah, so thank you. Last week I got a bit personal with a personal story, and that was actually part of a storytelling event. So I have the privilege of working for a really great company that creates spaces that allows for its employees to be able to tell their stories as they continue the process of, unlearning problematic tendencies, also uplifting voices and prioritizing allyship. So the other half I will share with you today. And I think it's kind of perfect because it fits with the story that I'm trying to tell in this episode in terms of theme. So I feel like I had to. So I'll share my story and then we'll get into interviews. And then again, we won't have a lightning round because I'm going to be doing a little something special on Instagram. So if you're not already following me, really, you should be. But my Instagram handle is Ray Lopez, and that's SRAELOPEZ, and you'll hear it again at the end of the episode as I do at the end of every episode. And I'll just be highlighting women and non-binary people in the filmmaking space and really just giving you the opportunity to quickly follow them and follow their work, support their work, and find ways in which you can get involved in some of these things. So yeah, this week you've actually got a ton of resources. You've got the show notes that we're putting together. You've got the Instagram story fun that's coming. So lots of people to follow, lots of things to keep on your radar. So you're welcome. So let's get into it. Let's go back in time to my film school days. I can't remember what class this was in, and honestly, it really doesn't matter, but one of the instructors that we all admired invited a guest speaker to the class. The guest speaker spoke about the importance of networking and how starting groups at school could be a really great way of doing that. After class, I approached the instructor who was chatting with the guest speaker, and I asked if there were any groups that were just for women. He looked at me over his shoulder, scoffed, and said, "Nah, people try that all the time, but it never sticks. It's like no one cares after a while." That one stung. I care. And there have to be other people who care. But I can totally see that after being left out and othered for a period of time, it weighs on you. That was pretty discouraging. A few months later, an opportunity arose for me to join the board of Women in Film and Television Florida as a student member. This allowed me to sit in on board meetings that were held on the Universal Studios lot and meet women who had been in the industry for years. It was during those meetings and seeing that dynamic among these women that I truly saw the value in a community made up of women and how important advocacy is for representation on screen and behind the camera. After graduation, I moved to Austin and worked in production for a few years. I definitely ran into the same very male, very white environment, but this time I was armed with the wherewithal to seek out other women and build community and starting and joining groups that filled that need. Today, I'm bringing you several women who are leading organizations and productions focused on filling gaps left by years of inequality caused by misogyny and sexism in the film world. So let's revisit the conversation we started with Gail Cronauer last week.
So there are these little pockets, these little seedlings of change and progress that I think are happening. In terms of Women in Film Dallas, um, I've been involved with the organization. I'm now vice president, but I've been involved with the organization on and off for decades. They've been around over 30 years. So when I first learned of the organization, I was like, "Oh my god, film." I mean, film to me was still like Hollywood, and for me, even as an actor in training, I mean, you just didn't get to go make movies. I mean, that was for people who were out there, that if you're gonna be an actor, you're gonna be slogging it out on stage. I mean, that was my sense of it, and maybe a few people made that transition, but for most of us, that wasn't gonna be the way, the road went. And so when I found out about women in film and I'd done a few projects, it was like, I'd love to get involved. But the women who were running the organization seemed to me to be established professionals. And at the time, I think it was okay, these are women who are um, doing this, whether they were writing or directing or producing, and they're at a certain level. And in order to join the organization, you have to be sponsored by someone, oh my God, and have so many years in the industry. And so I was pleasantly surprised when I was invited to join the organization. Well, I'm in and out of it because of teaching and life and kids and whatever. And now I think the organization is much more about um, working to build the future of the industry and women's opportunities and advancement in the industry. So we've really been reaching out to young, right out of college, or if not young, women who are going, hey, I'm a 40, 50-year-old woman who's had a career and raised my kids, and I've got something I want to say, and I can do it with video. I can do it with film. I can do it with podcasts. I can do it with radio. So the complexion of women in film literally is really changing. And that's amazingly exciting that we have so many different kinds of women, different voices, different experiences coming into our ranks. Now, this Best Gals workshop that we did last weekend, it was great. There were a lot of people who women who were already producing their own work, and they needed practical skill. They had a lot of passion, they had a lot of ideas, didn't have a lot of technical know-how or experience. And this was also plugging them in to people who could be mentors for them. So that was great.
So, over the time that you've been involved with women in film, have you seen these kinds of connections kind of blossom into anything? And, what's been your experience in witnessing that?
Right. Well, this is interesting to me because um, the women who in the past have tended to gravitate toward the organization have been women who are screenwriters, directors, producers. Um, that what we might call the auxiliary professions, women who are in wardrobe, costume design, women who are now grips, who are in makeup, who are actors, who are generating work. But that's changing because so many women these days are like, hey man, I'm a hyphenate. I like to believe um, that networking and mentoring is um, increasing in terms of the numbers and depths of opportunities. Um, that word mentor has become much more visible, much more heard, I think, in our culture, in the Women in Film Dallas, in the filmmaking culture. Um, it's been going on for years, but it's often been women being mentored, if they were fortunate enough, by men, or it's been men mentoring men, and women oftentimes having to find their own way to get to where they are.
For those of you wondering, there are several Women in Film and Television chapters around the world. Many of them sit under the WIFT International umbrella, and the American chapters are usually affiliated with WIFT US in some way. In Texas, there are Houston, Dallas, and Austin chapters, and today I found out that there's a San Antonio chapter recently launched, so that's pretty cool. It'd be great to have WIFT chapters in El Paso and RGV too, right? So if anyone out there listening in those regions are interested in spinning up a chapter of WIFT, I'm sure WIFT US might be able to point you in the right direction. Also, now is probably a good time for a shameless plug. I was the co producer and co host for the WIFT Austin podcast that's focused on women in the industry. So, if you're interested in hearing more in depth interviews, you can check out the show notes or my bio and find the show details there. WIFT Dallas also hosts a monthly podcast, so check that one out too. We got another former guest on this week's episode, and that's Stephanie Saint Sanchez from QFest. Not only is she programming shorts for the Houston based festival, she has created a showcase on her own called Senorita Cinema. She'll talk about her inspiration to create this Latina centered space for filmmakers and why it's so important to her as an artist to have this sense of community.
I came across something called BH Life, which stands for the Boyle Heights Latina Independent Film Extravaganza. And it was founded by Real Women Have Curves, the woman who did Real Women Have Curves, Josefina Lopez. And this was in Boyle Heights in Los Angeles. But so I got in, right? And it was a big thrill. And I decided, okay, I'm serious about this, right? So I'm gonna get my cash money together. I'm gonna fly out to Los Angeles to be in this big old film festival. And little did I know, I get there and it's just, I don't want to say it's so small, and there's nobody famous really, but it was incredible. The sense of community that was there, all the people that were down for this cause, and all the Latinas that were there, all the Latina filmmakers that were there. As a woman filmmaker, or even as a Latina, double dipping right there. Whenever you're in a room full of men filmmakers, they act like you're stupid. They act like you don't know, what a BNC is, or a female to male connector, like you don't speak their language. So, to be able to talk shop with these women who had this, their own challenges and their own adventures to get to where they were and their inspirations. So went there, had the best time ever, got this, celebrated, as someone that, hey, you did something, man, all these women, went out and they, started doing their things in all these parts of the world and stuff. And I came back to Houston feeling real good. And because I'm an artist, I guess I kind of straddled this like world of like making movies, but then making installation pieces, you know, everything, paintings, drawings, cartoons, just creative stuff in general. Um, so I got a residency, a studio residency at the Lawndale Art Center. And one of the components is that you had to do a presentation at the end of your stint there. And I was like, well, I don't really want to teach film. I don't want to do a presentation on how to make a movie in like an hour and a half. That's, and my body of work wasn't, that was the project that I had already done. So you already got to see that. So I proposed to bring some of the films from BH Life to Houston and to spotlight that and to talk about that. So next thing I know, 2 weeks later, the first Senorita Cinema happened at the Lawndale Art Center on the second floor with about 25 people, and that's where it started. And we started doing it ever since then. And it just took off. And what happens with, unfortunately, that I've learned this myself, is that a lot of the reasons that Latina filmmakers they drop off because they have families. They get married and they start having kids, and it's really hard to balance all those things. And so you disappear sometimes, and it's sad because it doesn't really happen to men a lot. Men get to continue doing their artistic endeavors, and the woman traditionally will be supportive and watch the kids and do the caretaking and all that. But that's not necessarily, I mean, that's what is it called? I don't want to say historically, but cultural, right? That's our culture. So it's unfortunate because these women, who came out the gate with these strong visions and ideas, kind of have to like scale way back, and sometimes they never come back. And now this year, since COVID, I have a 4-year-old and I have a 4-month-year-old, and life has just gone bananas for me because I'm in the sandwich where it's like I have young children and aging parents. So I'm being really spread very, very thin. And the support of, although it's there, I don't know if we're going to be able to do it. So they're starting up BH Life again because Josefina Lopez's kids are finally graduating high school. And so she's like, it's time. Yeah. So she's like, okay, let's get the gang back together. And they're in meetings right now. And so BH Life supposedly is going to be back. So this year I'm going to, we've talked about it, and I'm going to send those films over there. And I'm probably going to do some judging, maybe submit something, but still be very involved because I believe that as Latinas, we still have to support each other. Look, I'm a Tejana all my heart, but I will tell you about the second or the third time I went to BH Life, every time I went, I'd always bring Tejana films with me. I would tell all my friends about it, right? All my Tejanas, and they would submit. And before you knew it, oh shit, the Tejana contingency is here. So that felt really good. So I hope that we have that, this year. Because like I said, there is something to be said for being in a room full of people that know, where you can be yourself and talk openly, and you don't have to worry about like saying the wrong thing and someone's going to hear it and talk business, and then you're blacklisted for the next 4 years in the industry. So in a nutshell, that's Señorita Cinema. I'm not going to change the name. People are like, shouldn't it be Señora? And I was like, well, let's just change it to Doña. Shoot, I'm almost there anyway. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, right?
You'll always be a señorita at heart, right?
I read an article about women artists, right? Like, where do we go after we are riot girls, right? If our art brand was being a rebel badass, at some point you evolve into other things, and it could be age, it could be background, it could be history, it could just be maturity, learning that, you don't always have to be a fucking mess to make art, but it does help. But where do you go from there, right? So that sandwich also of like, the children and the parents. So I think that that's a voice, if you are the filter, right? Your mind is the filter, and your experience. So life experience and the expression of that coming through you is going to be a unique thing. And if someone's into it, then they are.
Stephanie opened up a whole new line of thinking for me when it comes to the evolution of women in film, right? When we think about the many phases that we go through, especially if raising children is a choice that's made and all of the logistics involved in that. Even if you're child free by choice like myself, what does that mean when it comes to aging parents, right? There are implications for us as Latinas for generations of gender roles that have been placed on us, right? Y'all, that could be a whole other podcast. So if anyone wants to hire me for something like that, let me know. Over in El Paso, Fem Frontera is also showcasing Latina talent specific to stories focused on the border. Angie Reza Tures is the executive director, and she'll talk us through what kind of stuff they're doing over in El Paso.
We're a film organization located in El Paso, Texas, but really we serve the whole region of El Paso, Las Cruces, New Mexico, and Juarez, Chihuahua, on the other side of the border in Mexico. And it's a really fantastic opportunity to grow a community of filmmakers who are regional, but also from all over the world, specifically border regions. We have a lot of similarities and a lot of ways that we can come together to talk about issues that are important to us, that affect all of us, whether or not you're a part of a border. These are issues that affect all of us directly. So it's been an absolute joy to be able to do this kind of work. And we are also very BIPOC oriented, women, non-binary, and trans. Our programs are kind of broken down in terms of the festival is our film festival called the Fem Frontera Filmmaker Showcase is now in its 6th year, which is weird to say, but it's really cool. And that's sort of at the forefront of all that we do. But we have other programs that support the film festival. So we have our filmmaking workshops, mostly during the summer for both youth and adults, to create an even larger community of filmmakers and people able to tell their stories in this region. And then we have a grants program for, again, filmmakers in this region. And then we take the films on tour, and we take them on tour all over the country, all over the world. Every showcase, gets its chance not to just be seen in this region, but again, in places all over the world.
Can you talk a little bit about the history of Fem Frontera, how it started, and what you kind of identified in terms of a need that needed to be filled at that time?
Yeah, so I had just completed a short film and I wanted to premiere it, but I thought, well, it's a short and that's going to be kind of weird to premiere a 15-minute film. So I called friends and filmmakers who I had known because I hadn't been in El Paso for very long at that point. I'm from here, but I had lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for almost 13 years. And so coming back to El Paso, I certainly didn't have a large filmmaking community that I knew of or was a part of, but I did have a handful of really great, incredibly talented friends who I was able to call and just say, hey, do you want to premiere? Do you have a film that you want to show? And we'll call it Fem Frontera, and it'll just be, all women films from the border. And luckily, all of them said yes. So it was 6 of us, and we premiered on August 6, 2016. And it was just the most fun I've ever had as a filmmaker. And after that, we're like, okay, we got to keep going. And there were people telling us, you got to take this showcase on the road. It was just by total luck that all of the films had similar topics and that they were all filmed and shot in this region. And so it was just such a perfect curated showcase without that being the intention. And so we did. We took the films on the road and we screened in LA and South Carolina and Austin and just various places around the country. And then, people asked if we ever would teach classes. And so we started teaching classes. So everything happened very organically and sprouted out of what people were asking us to do. It really wasn't this intention of we're going to start a film festival, it's going to be annual, and then we're going to run all these programs. It was just, it kind of all happened on accident. And then after that, every decision that we made after that was, of course, very deliberate. But up to that point, there's even still lots of things that happen to us that I feel, have just sort of dropped in our lap. And that we've been so fortunate to do. It's been incredible.
So you mentioned that there were a lot of kind of similar themes in the time that y'all have been road showing and more visibility on the showcase itself. Have you seen those same themes pop up, or has there been variety? What is the trend looked like in terms of the types of films that you're showing?
Yeah, so our mission remains the same, and it has since we first started. I think that just again by chance, because all of the films that we showcased our first year were so deeply rooted in the border and in Latinx women specifically. I think that every year since then has, we've sort of modeled it after the first one. And so a lot of the themes that you continue to see revisited are themes regarding gender roles, immigrants, LGBTQ community, and various other issues that we as border people tend to come across a lot of the time. But again, it's not specific to the border necessarily. And so I believe that, our themes have to do a lot with just social justice and with humanitarian issues. It's interesting because we had a staff meeting yesterday and we were just talking about the film selections that we received this year. And it's vastly different from any of the submissions that we've received in all the previous 5 showcases, which this year it seems to be more, there's some that are a little bit, more lighthearted, not necessarily going into a lot of the same issues that we've been showcasing before. There's a lot of humor, there's a lot of experimental films, there's some horror films. And so we were discussing yesterday whether or not that's going to, make us turn into a different direction. And I still feel like all of the films that are submitted to us in general have a very strong, powerful message. That's for sure. I think that we have already shown that the films that we tend to accept do, and so I think moving forward, though, it remains to be seen how this is going to continue evolving and stretching and growing. So we'll see.
Living in El Paso, just inherently being so kind of quote unquote far away from the other kind of production hubs within the state, what kind of challenges are you facing from the perspective of, a female Latina filmmaker in El Paso and really trying to make things happen production wise?
It's interesting. The film community, there is a film community out here. The women filmmaker community is starting to grow quite a bit. But I feel like it's still slightly dominated by men. And I would say 90% of the crew members are male. And I've also heard from women who have tried to collaborate or work with them, that not all of them, but many of them are not friendly. A lot of them, take a lot of control, want to be in control, are not willing and open to work with, female filmmakers, female crew members in a way that is not questioning their decisions, questioning what it is that they want to do, dominating the scene, dominating, how it is that the team is working. And so, and so I think that Femme Frontera, for me and my wonderful staff, we are so aware of those experiences and how we tend to get left behind, that I feel like our organization is constantly trying to pick up the fallen pieces and be like, we're here to support in any way that we can, in ways where we know that you're not being listened to, in ways that you feel invisible. We're here to be the antithesis of that, and to support you in any way that we can. So it's very important. And it's worked for us to sort of figure out how to provide a lot of these women with the resources and the support and, the moral support that we need as female filmmakers. But it's starting to get stronger, and I'm starting to see a change. And I'm really hopeful that this community, both male and female, are going to come together. I would say in the next, you know, 5-ish years, it's going to be a little bit more collaborative in a good way. At least that's what I'm hoping for. And that's why I feel like what we do is so cool, because um, we are, as a team and as a community, because it's not only the staff and our board and our partners, but it's the Femme Frontera community that we've built, that is made up of all the filmmakers who've ever been in showcases, all the students who've ever taken our classes, up to anyone who's even submitted a film to our showcase. You know, we have a large community now that's really beautiful. And really, I mean, we've built this as a way to fill all those needs that just aren't here, you know, that aren't around. And then to, you know, reach even further outside of our community and bring in people who aren't here, you know. Um, and this has been especially important for us with regards to trying to give a leg up to people from this region to tell stories about it. You know, there's a lot of people who I've met who are coming in from different parts of the country wanting to tell stories about issues that are happening here on the border. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. However, they're not really collaborating with folks who are in this community. And so you get a very outsider perspective, most often perspectives that aren't true at all to what life is really like in the region, or that, you know, or they aren't able to offer any nuances of what it's actually like to live in this community. And you know, our reality is so much more complex than what's being shown on screen. And so it's so important. And that's part of why we exist, if not the sole reason that we exist, is to challenge a lot of the perspectives of what is coming out of our region. You know, the various stories that are often one-sided and a little too simplified, you know. And so that's also a need that we have. And a lot of times too, you know, the people who often get the grants to come out here, you know, to tell stories, they have more experience than maybe someone from this region. But that shouldn't be a prerequisite to receive a grant to come out and tell stories about this region. You know, a prerequisite should be, are you from that region? Do you know the day to day? Do you know the culture? Are you part of the culture? Those should be the qualifications. You know, skills can always be learned. You know, that's not a problem, but you can't teach someone overnight what it's like to live in this reality day to day.
What are things that you're hopeful for in the shifts that you've seen happening?
I see our filmmakers, our community of women filmmakers, being included in a lot more conversations now. Being included in crews, being made up of entire women crews. Um, we're no longer being questioned as much as we were. I'm just seeing them appear on film sets a lot more. And I'm also seeing them get hired more often. I mean, we're lucky that people from all over the country will send us emails asking us for crew in this area, because they're coming down to shoot something, or because they want to, you know, they want a representative from this region on their crew. And so we have a beautiful community from which to recommend, absolutely amazingly talented individuals. And so I'm starting to see that change. We're getting a lot more requests for things like that. So, but I think within our region, I see, you know, when we have our Femme Frontera mixers, which is a day before the film festival, we invite all filmmakers of all genders and all backgrounds, and I see there being more of a seamless collaboration between both. It's not any more them versus us. It's more like, there's more excitement in the air of working together, of making this more of a tight-knit unit. And I think that everyone is starting to see mutual benefits from working together rather than apart. So every year I see that a little bit more, and that's why I'm hopeful.
Another El Paso filmmaker who is closely working with Femme Frontera is Iliana Sosa, also someone whose work I admire and am lucky to call a friend. Iliana Sosa is a narrative and documentary filmmaker from El Paso, currently living and working in Austin. She just picture-locked her most recent documentary, Lo que dejamos atrás, What We Leave Behind, which has been part of several filmmaking residencies and lab-type programs throughout its development. She's got a ton of accolades, and honestly, I'm just trying to figure out how to pretend to be a UT student again so I can take her classes. The woman is visionary. You'll see.
Yeah, so right now, part of the reason why I moved back to Austin was I took a job at UT Austin. It's a tenure track um, assistant professor position, and it's my first dive into academia because before that I was mostly doing freelance, and so now I'm in that world, which has been interesting. And then before that, I was in LA for about 8 years, and I went to film school out there and got my MFA in directing at UCLA, which was also a very interesting experience. Um, and yeah, I mean, I love being back in Texas, and it's really allowed me to make the films that I want to make. Funny enough, like I wasn't really making the stuff I wanted to make in LA.
Why do you think that is?
I think it was maybe just the pressure of like living in LA and always commuting to, it's a lot. It's like the industry is always in your face, which, for some people that works, but not for me. Like you step into a coffee shop and people are talking about films, about this production, about this script, and it's always around you. But also the pressure of maybe having to be a certain way or make things in a certain way. Like I felt that a lot in LA, whereas I feel like in Texas and especially in Austin, I don't know, especially when you're making documentary films and indie stuff, you're not doing it for the money. You're doing it for the art form. And I feel like people in Texas and the community I've been able to surround myself with, and I feel very grateful for, people are doing it because they love it and they want to make, they want to make the films they're making, not because, oh, I'm going to go and make a lot of money or win an award. It's like they're just passionate about it. So I have found that was the difference I found. Not to say that doesn't exist in LA, but for me, it just felt very isolating. And especially in film school, like I was the only Latina in this program, in the grad program. Then, they take 19 directors. I was the only Latina, and I just felt it was a bit of a culture shock. And, I don't know. I just feel more at home, obviously, in Texas, being born and raised there. So,
You mentioned the community that you've surrounded yourself with. Can you talk more about that?
yeah, I, fortunately, so when I first arrived to Austin a few years ago, before that, I went to undergrad near Austin. So I've always been in and out of Austin for the last couple of years, but then I worked at the Austin Film Society back in 2015. And it was a very interesting place in the sense that I just got to know a bunch of people. And I connected really well with, this amazing filmmaker who were both had mutual friends, Chelsea Hernandez. And she was like my first introduction to like the Austin documentary scene. And she had approached me when I was still working at AFS and was like, hey, would you want to co-direct a documentary with me? And I was like, short. And I was like, oh, sure. That sounds amazing. And it was called An Uncertain Future, about these two women who happened to be pregnant during Trump's presidency. One is undocumented and the other one was married to someone who was undocumented at the time. I mean, that sounds amazing. And that the kinds of issues that short raises are things that I had been working on in film school about immigration and just social issues and all of that. So it was amazing to collaborate with her in that way. And I mean, now she's, I'm collaborating with her on this other project, the Omnibus project. And, she's now, I mean, she's a dear friend of mine, but also someone that I love to work with. And, getting to meet her was sort of it was my introduction to like the bigger, broader indie film community in Austin. And I just found what I discovered with working with her and with other filmmakers in Austin was like, I love working with people that I also like to hang out with. From there, I was like, oh, I can make the content. I don't like to call it content, but I can make the films I want to make here in the state I grew up in. I don't have to be in LA. For what? I mean, sure, it's great to meet people and have connections and maybe meet funders, but honestly, like I think you can make the films that you want to make being here and not having to be in LA or New York. Although the industries are there, but Austin has now a growing scene.
I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about this omnibus film you've talked about. What is the project? How did the idea come about? All of that.
I guess the best way to describe it is an anthology film that's being helmed by 5 Latina directors, and we're all telling our version of Texas, of how it is to grow up here in our own language and from our hometowns and our perspectives. And I, a few years ago, I'd been thinking about just films like Slacker or just, these other omnibus films. There's another one called Collective Unconscious that came out at South by a few years ago. And the creator of that project picked few directors to direct each other's dreams. So, and I was like, wow, that's such a cool idea to do a feature, but, as a collective and not just one director. And I thought, I don't know, somehow I just started thinking, I was like, I'd love to see that, but told from a Latina perspective and like having Latina directors, all women, and why not like set in Texas and like us tell our stories, because there's a lot of Latino content out there, but it's very typically told from like an LA perspective or growing up in LA or California, and we rarely see it from Texas, and it's very different. It's totally different point of view. And I started thinking about the Latina filmmakers that I know and like respect and whose work I loved, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool to all work together and make a feature? And so that's when I reached out to Chelsea Hernandez, Sharon Arteaga, and there's Lizette Barrera and Jasmine Diaz, and all filmmakers whose work I really love and who I connected to through the Austin Film Society, because that's how I met Sharon. That's how I met Jasmine, and Lizette was like watching their work through that. I used to review grants for AFS and do that. And so that's how I met them and then saw their work. And I was like, wow, these are brilliant women. Like, I really think they have an interesting perspective. I like their aesthetic. They're super talented. And I was like, why don't we all just make a feature together? And usually, making a fiction feature is hard to get off the ground, and to have a feature under our belts. Like, I think I thought that idea was super intriguing, because then, ultimately, and I've talked to them, it's like, we want to be making features, like not shorts anymore. Like, we want to be in the feature world and maybe eventually directing for television. I was like, well, wasn't this a way for us to have a feature under our belt and hopefully help each other, segue into the next phase of our careers? And I love the idea of collaborating with women that I love, but also like, why not do it together instead of trying to work each of us individually on making a feature or on our own little shorts? It's like, there's more power in numbers, honestly, and more brains, right? Like, so why not do it in that way? And so I approached them individually, and they were like, yeah, sure. Like, great. And so, it started off as this crazy idea, and then, COVID hit. And so all of last year and this year, we've been doing Zoom meetings and workshopping our scripts. And, we applied to a little grant, the Texas, which one was it? The Boss Babes ATX grant, and we got that. And it was just a big surprise. They were like, oh, cool, like some funding to do a retreat, to develop scripts. We applied to the AFS grant. So Kat Candler like approached us. It was like, hey, I want to help you guys like make this and be a mentor. And so she's a mentor now. And so is Aurora Guerrero. Oh, Elizabeth Avellan too, like helped us also. Like they've all been advocating the project, and it's just been really beautiful to see where it's turned into. And now it's we all have drafts. We'll probably shoot next year. We have funding now. We got a big grant. It hasn't been announced yet, but I think will be soon. So they gave us a pretty substantial grant that we received it, and now we got to make it. Like, I'm super excited and super thrilled. I feel like, wow, it started as like this little idea, like, wouldn't it be cool to bring together these group of women and make this? And now it's actually it's always been a real project, but it's like now we have funding to make it, like execute it. And it feels so good to be back in the fiction world. Like I miss fiction. And, one of the directors, Chelsea Hernandez, will be her first fiction, dive into it, which is super exciting. So it just feels great to be able to work with these women and like make this happen, because I think that perspective hasn't been told yet. Like, I don't, and it's sad to me that it's 2021, we don't have something like that. I mean, there's shows coming out, right? There's shows like Vida, and you have this, female perspective coming out now, this Latina female perspective, but it's largely absent and told from our point of view, and not by a male writer. Like, we're all, we're telling the stories from where we grew up, and not only is that important to us, but also hiring, like during production and post, like people of color, like being intentional about who we're hiring below the line, but also who are we bringing into the fold into this. So that's the spirit of the project, and hopefully we can carry it through.
Wow, that is so badass. I feel like I tell y'all this all the time, but like, this is such a special thing, and I hope you know that. I know it's real easy to get all caught up in the like, we got to do the grants, we got to write the drafts and all of that stuff, but like, this is a really cool thing.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, but it makes it cool too, is who's part of it. And I feel like everyone like who's part of it is forging their own path and making their own history, and in their own families, in their own way. Like, a few of us are like first generation, and also like we're not the typical, not to say every filmmaker comes from money or like, but it's like not, I think we're breaking the mold in many ways, not only by this project, but also professionally, by who we are, what we stand for. So that's what's exciting about it too. And I hope people, it resonates with people. I think the stories are pretty cool. And yeah, I'm just hoping that it, I mean, it's also interesting that it's like multiple people. So they're like creatively too, like it's, it's quite the undertaking, because it's not just, there's a lot, when we have to compromise, but also collaborate and listen to each other. So it's a good, it's learning how to communicate, but also work as a team and get something like this off the ground. Yeah, it's, I think production was going to be quite interesting, but it's been like, honestly, this project during COVID has been like my saving grace. It just really grounded me. And I don't want to speak for everyone but I knew for me, it was just like, it was something really beautiful to look forward to every week, and be like, oh, I'm going to chat with these filmmakers and talk about our stories, or just, I don't know, and just vent about how we were all feeling. And it's just been really a healing project, and one that I'm really grateful for just to be part of, because yeah, it was, I mean, as last year was really hard. So it was nice to have that like stability in one way.
The project's working title is Untitled Texas Latina Project and has received multiple grants to date. They are currently in the running for the 2021 SF Film Rein In grant, so let's keep our fingers crossed. Also, Yen Tan is also in the running for that one, so cheering him on too. Iliana mentioned the various women working on that project, one of them being Chelsea Hernandez, who she attributes to welcoming her into the Austin film scene. Chelsea is a filmmaker based in Austin, and her most recent documentary, Building the American Dream, is Emmy nominated. I talked with her specifically about female filmmaker focused groups, so we won't dive too deep into her career. But if that's what you're aching for after hearing this interview, I have good news for you. Shameless plug number 2, enter stage left. Chelsea was the very first guest on the Creatives Potluck podcast, my podcast baby, and I do an in-depth interview with her about how she started and her career as a filmmaker. Highly recommend you check that one out for sure. Here's Chelsea talking about what groups focused on female filmmakers mean to her. Can you talk about why Tejanas in Film was started and why it's an important space for filmmakers?
Sure. So I became a member of this Facebook private group called Brown Girls Doc Mafia. This is like back in 2015, I think. No one really knew about it, and somehow it popped up on my Facebook feed. And I joined it not knowing too much about it. I think at the time there was only like 500 members. But it was a safe space for women of color who were filmmakers, and that term has since like expanded into LGBTQ plus, non-binary, and what does brown girls mean, um, and it's really a place for people to uplift each other, to network, to share job postings, to share rough cuts, anything creative, like and anything dealing with the documentary industry specifically. You can chat about, you can share things on there. But it was also like a private Facebook group, so people could have, more intimate conversations about the inequities of women of color filmmakers in the documentary industry. And it was just really nice to have that, considering I felt like I was going through so much of these like inequalities just myself, in Texas. And then to see the same stories pop up with other people, unfortunately, but because I was seeing that they were going through it too, I didn't feel alone. And I was like, oh, okay, so it's not me, like me personally, it's the fact that there's these inequalities happening to women of color in our industry. And so then it was great to, seek advice from people about what to do if if you encountered some sort of situation. And I feel like at the time I was just encountering situations with white people a lot, and I wasn't sure if it was because of race or just me. And I realized in, being a part of this group that it was, the inequalities of underrepresented people in the industry. And then I realized, like, what would be cool is if we had the same thing, but specific to Texas filmmakers, because I was also realizing through this group, I was meeting more people in Texas who were women of color. And I was like, it would be really great if we could have our own like safe space to talk about things that are specific to Texas that we're dealing with. Because even though Texas is a very big state, it's still a very small industry. It's kind of the same small group of people as well. And so it would be nice to just have a safe space to be able to speak up about things and to also like just share I mean, it's such a big deal to be able to have access to job positions on different shoots. It really is about like who you know, and when our industry is just like a bro culture where it's just like, I'm bringing my buds on to this film. Like, it's really difficult to like get your foot in the door. So that was another reason behind creating TIFF 2, is to be able to share these resources, because everyone talks about Texas being the third coast, but I really feel like it's not. It's barely there. The resources are still in LA, they're still in New York. And if we can like bring those resources here to Texas and we can have access to them, then hopefully we can, elevate each other and our voices and our stories into, the overall industry.
How has Tejanas in film been helpful for you, and how have you seen it evolve over time?
I think one of the hardest things at being like a Latina in the industry is like that hustle you have to continue to do. And there's so much juggling. I continue to like not figure out the work-life balance thing at all. I've kind of given up, but it's that's what's really hard about starting groups like this, is like if you don't have any money, it's still like a side gig sort of. But what I have realized is that people needed it, and they needed this space, and they needed people. And like what you've started too with the cafecitas, like meeting every Sunday, like, and people just getting together to speak about what they're working on and see if it piques anyone's interest. Like just having that space and that time to share that with other people that you don't know, who are just like you, who are working up in the industry as well. Like people want that and they really need it, and it's just really good for the soul. So I've just like, I've been a little hands off lately, but what I love seeing is just like people sharing resources, people collaborating, hearing new projects that they're working on, being able to go to people, go to the group and ask for help on anything else. And it's really invigorating to see that there are a lot of us like working in the field too. And it just blows my mind seeing these like the USC Annenberg like study about women in media and how Latinas are like, I don't know, like barely, 3%, working in the industry. And it's like, but we're here, like we are totally here. So just being inspired by people and hoping, and what I can do too is like help uplift others too and spread their projects and try to get them in touch with others. Like that to me is really fulfilling, just like helping others with connections that maybe they don't have, and then just supporting them by going to their films or telling people about their films.
So you mentioned that you talk about inequalities. You've mentioned that several times. Can you talk a bit about those specifically for Latina, specifically here in Texas? And I know that your kind of vantage point is from the documentary space, but also kind of expanding out of that and being able to observe through the group and all of that. Like, what are your observations from that perspective?
Yeah, I think it's really a lack of resources, or a lack of, or not having access to the resources. And like I mentioned, like it is still this bro like culture in the industry where people just hire their buds to work on these films. And I think that is a huge inequality to people who are trying to work up the ladder and trying to get into these spaces. And when you don't open up to, specific groups of people, like when you don't target, the Black community, the Latinx community, the Asian American community, like you are missing out on talent, and hard workers and just extreme passion. And I think in Texas, like you have to be you have to like reach out to those communities even more. Like you do have to work harder, because the film industry is just like very, very white in Texas. And it has progressed, some over the past couple years. I think the summer of 2020 definitely made people think a little bit more. But until we see, like all the, grant recipients for the Austin Film Society, Texas grant, Be All People of Color, like, then I'm not sure it's like changed much, I think we're going down the right path, but it's going to take a while to like change. So it's really just like having access to those resources that I think is the biggest inequality in being a person of color, especially in Texas, where we don't have the financial capital or resources like LA and New York, or even like New Mexico, where like Netflix is. So it's just about like working a little bit harder here, and I feel like um, yeah, I've also, and this is like just my personal experiences. I feel like I grew up not, I grew up made to think like you shouldn't ask for things, and so I never really tried to push my way into doors or ask if I can like open some doors. And I think that may have, set me back some. And now I have realized that, yeah, like a lot of white people just bust through doors. You know what I mean? And I'm now realizing like I can do that too. I'm going to knock down the door also, I do have a voice and I want to share it, and I'm going to knock down this damn door.
And knock down the door she does. Full disclosure, I'm on the steering committee of Tejanas in Film, so obviously have a bias here. But of course, I'm going to take the opportunity to spotlight my friends when they deserve it, right? Speaking of, I do think I should shout out Sharon Arteaga here too. Hi, Sharon. Because she is the third person on the steering committee, making TIFF super valuable and a great place for Tejana filmmakers. Okay, third plug. While I'm here, Sharon, Chelsea, and I started a watch-along podcast last year about Selena the series on Netflix. Yes, we watched all of the episodes, and yes, we talk about all of them. Don't ask me if I like it or not. You're just going to have to listen to the podcast. It's called TIFF Voices, the Selena the Series edition, and you can listen to it anywhere you get your pods. Also, Sharon was on the Creatives Potluck too, so there's that. Okay, that's enough. Stop asking me. Okay, we've got one more person to talk to today, and that's Laura Kincaid. You may know her from the ATX TV Festival or formerly of the Texas Film Commission. If not either of those, then likely Austin Women Film, a casual happy hour for women who are working in film.
So before I worked at ATX, I worked at the Texas Film Commission for, oh my goodness, like 9.5 years. And I was an intern before that. So, deep roots there. And I loved it. It was one of those jobs that I would have never known about had I not stumbled upon this internship. There's just so many support services and things surrounding film. I went to UT Film School, but immediately knew I would make a terrible filmmaker. Like that was not my life. I love to be bossy, but like don't want to be in charge of a film set. Like that's not my level of bossiness. So it became sort of film support services sort of things. And what I did at the Film Commission focused mainly around our marketing efforts, which really involved film festivals, nonprofits, community organizers, like people around the state who were trying to create that film community. And I would just kind of talk through people through things, which I loved. That's the level of what telling people I want to do, like consulting as opposed to being in charge of a film set. So while I was at the Texas Film Commission, we did have a women-centric film organization in Austin called Real Women, REEL Women, that had been around for a really long time and ended up sort of disbanding, I want to say 2010. So they disbanded, and it was definitely a space that I think a lot of people really wanted to have filled. And so we had two sort of like ladies groups pop up. Maya Perez and Kat Candler each sort of took on one like once every 6 months. Like I think Maya organized the first one at the Driscoll. I could get this wrong. Might have been Kat. But one of the ladies organized like this big Driscoll meeting where it was kind of like it's a Saturday, invite every woman you know who works in film, we'll all meet at the Driscoll. So I went to that first one and was like, well, this is great. And then when the second one rolled around, when either Maya or Kat was like, we're going to do it again, went to the second one. And I was like, well, this is great again. So I asked both of them, I was like, hey, are you okay if I take this on in a very informal way? They were both okay with it. And so I organized Austin Women Film, which is in the loosest sense a community organization. Like it doesn't have any membership dues. There's not a website, although I did at one point have great designs on making it sort of a bigger organization. But it really just takes a lot of work. So the whole driving force for me was like less organization, more community. So there's nothing to sign up for. It is based all on Facebook. It is completely a like show up and meet people sort of organization. So the pandemic really squashed it. So it's not gone, but it's been on a pandemic hiatus whilst, everyone's in their homes. But it was just something that I felt really strongly about because I loved those two original meetings so much. And it had less to do with me needing to make connections and me really enjoying having other people make connections and being able to be the space creator for something like that. It's very casual. It's very casual organization. Because like I mentioned, like actual support organizations with infrastructure and like that's a lot of work. But so the first couple were just folks I know, which was lovely. So after it kind of started to get a little bigger after the first couple, like honestly, just Facebook sharing. People like things on Facebook and you would create a Facebook event and people would come and it would sort of ebb and flow. So most of the folks that I know are in that film support service role. So a lot of festival folks, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of those folks. So I think like the first time we had a woman who came and she was like a camera operator and she was like, where are my other camera operators? And I was like, not here, but I can find them for you. I know where and we can get them, like we can still get you connected. I was like, but your production ladies, unfortunately, are not here yet, but don't worry. So it definitely was not really production focused. And it's just because that's not where my immediate contacts lie, but it started to occasionally get that way. It's just so fun and nice. And it's a nice way to see people and form connections. And some connections have been tighter than others. Some people I'll see once and I never see again. But I mean, that's kind of the film festival, like film production world, right? Like some people you end up working with over and over again and you form that connection and hopefully like, work with them again. And some people you're just like, you're really cool. Wish you luck. Hurrah. Best of luck. So I think if nothing else, like just the fact that so many of my contacts in film were women. Like all of my really close friends who were in kind of the nonprofit festival world were almost all women, plenty of amazing male friends, but a lot of ladies, and all of our bosses were women. So at the time, the Texas Film Commission had a female boss, AFS, South by, AFF, like all the kind of like film support services in town all had female bosses. And yet there was all this like talk about, I feel like I would run into people at festivals, women would run into women at festivals and they'd be like, I just like am really tired of working with men. It's the like, I know people are out there, but I don't know how to find them. And I mean, as we get older, literally just like making a new friend is aggressively hard. So it's, I think, occasionally easier for folks to make a new professional contact because you've got kind of that mission. It's a little bit less hard than making a new friend, but it's just so much easier if there's like a space to do that in. I think it was just like meeting new people, meeting new female filmmakers who just expressed a wish to meet more female filmmakers. I don't think anyone didn't think that like everybody wasn't out there, but it was like, how do I find them? So just create a little happy hour where maybe you have like a better chance of finding somebody you want to hang out with and know and work with.
What are your thoughts on just Texas film production in general?
I love Texas so much. I really do. Like we as a state have lots of problems, but it's also such an amazing state filled with like really amazing people. And I love that we have such a like deep history of film and production history here. And I just think that's like so amazing. There's so much that Texas has to offer simply because we are super large. It's so interesting, especially not ever wanting to be a filmmaker. But I feel like the diversity of locations and the look and the feel that you can actually get here is just so amazing. And I don't even have an eye for it. But like just the way that you can get like any creative vision, you can kind of coax it out of the state, which I think is so incredibly cool. And if you're working in places around the state, you're more than likely working with just like amazing people. So either the crew, like the people who know exactly what they're doing and they're like super amazing, crazily professionals who can really MacGyver anything too. Texans are scrappy. We're very talented and we're scrappy. And so there's that level of like get her done that's super great. But also just like the communities around Texas. Like there's just such excitement for production and film and media industry, and like being able to work with all of the amazing like city contacts and county contacts, I think just like creates like such a beautiful package to like make your creative vision happen.
I don't know how else to say it, people. We need spaces like this to be able to find support in the industry, because those of us in systemically excluded groups are subjected to workplace hazards like sexism and racism with little help from those in charge. There's no quote unquote HR in charge of accountability or determining the parameters for maternity leave. All of that stuff is left up to us to figure out on our own. So why not help each other out and share resources and the occasional vent session? I know it's changed my life to be able to lean on women in times where I felt alone, and to be able to provide that support to others is invaluable. Something that I think is really important to acknowledge is the fact that traditionally women-focused groups don't come without their own criticisms, right? There are many instances where non-binary people are not included, where trans people are not included, where queer people of color are not included. So definitely want to just acknowledge that, while groups are meant to be, inclusive and, a space that welcomes everyone, that's not necessarily the case in reality and where we are with feminism today. So something to acknowledge, something to keep top of mind as we continue to evolve what groups look like. Thanks to Gail Cronauer, Stephanie Saint Sanchez, Angie Reza Tures, Iliana Sosa, Chelsea Hernandez, and Laura Kincaid for contributing to this episode. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at @SRaeLopez, that's SRAELOPEZ, and follow Hyperreal Film Club on Instagram at Hyperreal Film Club or at the website hyperrealfilm.club. Thanks for listening to episode 9 of Hyperreal Film Club Presents Texas Film in Focus. Stay tuned for the next one, where I'll talk to more people about another aspect of why Texas is such a vibrant film community that breeds great stories and highly skilled talent. Texas Film in Focus is produced and hosted by me, Samantha Ray Lopez. Our editor/sound designer is Laura Rivero, and our podcast admin assistant is Chloe Carcamo. Special thank you to Hyperreal Film Club for letting me do whatever I want, and of course, the Texas Commission on the Arts.